Welcome to the NTT Health and Wellbeing Podcast, a show exploring the digital transformation of our everyday welfare. On this bonus episode, NTT hosted a live conversation following the release of their Global Workplace Report to share insights and analysis on the transformed workplace. In this recording of that conversation, Kevin Mulcahy, co-author of the Future Workplace Experience, joined Marilyn Chaplin, Chief Human Resources Officer of NTT Ltd, to discuss how, where, and why we work today, as well as what this all means for organizations navigating the new workplace.
Great. Well, welcome, Marilyn. I think we are assembling here online, so it's fantastic to have this opportunity to stream with you live on this wonderful day. And I wanted to welcome you, first of all, in your capacity as the CHRO NTT. Now, for those that are listening that may not be familiar with NTT, could you tell us a little bit about NTT and that organization and what role it plays in the world?
Sure, Kevin, and thank you. And wonderful to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you about NTT and who we are and our views on the future way of working. NTT is a large global company. Most of us, and most of you will know, it comes from Japan. That's our history. And we're NTT Ltd, which is the global company outside of Japan, very closely partnering with NTT Data. Interestingly enough, we carry about 45% of the world's internet traffic. Our heritage is networking, one of Cisco's biggest partners worldwide. We're a large data center business. We're also very much into cybersecurity and also onto managed services, managed collaboration services, etc. Very much a B2B business, Kevin, so people may know our brand less, but a key partner across all the industry sectors as we try to accelerate and enable this connected future in a secure way.
Fantastic. And how many people do you have in the organization that you're responsible for as a CHRO?
A CHRO for Limited, responsible for just close to 50,000 employees across all geographies. So we span, fully EMEA, APAC, the Americas, right down into South Africa, multiple countries, and as I said, large number of employees across all those geographic spans. And we may come to that when we talk about the future way of work, because obviously very different cultures, very different approaches, depending sometimes on where you are.
Great. And so we're here this afternoon to talk about the Global Workforce and Workplace Report that NTT sponsored. And I can see why you'd be so interested in the findings, because you have direct applicability across the world here. So let's pick apart some of those themes. So first of all, thank you for sponsoring the research. Whenever we have new insights, it always gives us something different to discuss in the HR community on what the implications for our business practices and policies are to make workplaces more compelling places to be. And on that theme, one of the big themes that came out of the research was improving the employee experience. And just as we set up that theme, what does employee experience mean to you personally?
Thanks, Kevin. I think what I would say is that what we found from the report, that employee experience as a strategic concept and as a differentiator is definitely heightened over the last 2 or 3 years, particularly accelerated due to the COVID pandemic, because increasingly it's really important as employers that we understand what employees value. And that is obviously embedded in the employee experience you offer as a company. And usually that will, span various what we would call moments that matter to an employee, such as being able to get your work done, how you remain connected with your fellow employees, with your clients. Obviously spans into all sorts of things like how you grow your career and the digital tools that you have access to as well. So that's really what underpins your experience day to day. And as I say, I think that's changed over COVID and during COVID, and now as we're coming out of that and going back into the way of working, my perception, certainly, Kevin, and what we picked up from the report is that employees are starting to value different things. And it's really important, I think, sometimes as certainly as a CHRO, we try and understand what is it today that employees value. And obviously different employees will value different things, but how do we think about the future way of work, of being an opportunity to differentiate ourselves as a company to attract employees by speaking to the employee experience that they value.
And so what do you think shapes the employee experience most, if there are some value propositions to employees that you can offer?
Well, what we're seeing, Kevin, is that everyone's talking about the Great Resignation. They're talking about, the challenge around attracting and retaining your talent. And obviously you want to appeal to employees and hopefully they join or stay with your company. And the differentiator we're starting to see, amongst other things, but when it comes to this future way of working, is much more around flexibility and around trying to understand and giving the employee a little bit more of the balance and the power, if that's the right way to put it. If you imagine the seesaw between employer and employee, we're finding the seesaw swinging more towards the employee and figuring out what they value. And without a doubt, we're picking up that employees value flexibility. Now, what does that mean? That means, I think when we first thought about coming back to the future way of work or how we would, execute this hybrid workplace, we'd send down a message from top management to say, you can work remotely or you can work 50% of your time in the office, which is important as a guideline. But I think what employees are valuing is the flexibility to be able to determine what that means in terms of how you execute it. When I come into the office, how I get my work done, how will be measured in terms of my work, those kind of things around personal choice is what we're seeing coming to the fore in employee experience, without any doubt, Kevin.
Right. So the key theme is if you can enable choices and let the employee choose how to engage with and shape their own experience at the workplace,
correct,
that tends to lead to more engaged, more satisfied employees. So one of the themes that came out of the report was the idea of modernizing workforce and workplace strategies, and essentially the notion of digital HR. And what does digital HR mean to you?
Kevin, I think what I've increasingly learned in my role at NTT Ltd is that as we address digital HR, increasingly it's that partnership between the CIO and the CHRO. I think historically, if one looked at employee experience, that would be the domain of the CHRO, and they would define the experience, embody it into an EVP or an employee value proposition, and kind of execute against those moments that matter that I talked about earlier. But the digital employee experience requires a partnering between the CIO and the CHRO. And for us, again, it's going back to those moments that matter, but thinking about how this connected future accelerated by digital is enhancing that digital experience that, frankly, employees have every day in their consumer way they go about doing their business. If you think about how we use digital technology in the way that we shop, in the way that we access healthcare, they expect exactly the same in the way that they get their work done. So from an HR perspective, it's about making sure my employees feel empowered, that they have the right tools in order to be able to get their work done, basically in a hybrid way. Now, that may be working from home, working from anywhere, working on a client premise, working in a physical office. Those are the kind of digital considerations we have to give to. And then, of course, being able to access and connect with their fellow employees in as human a way as possible if we're not physically connected. And that's what digital does. It gives you that chance to be connected, perhaps even more so in a human way. And if I think of when COVID hit back, some nearly 2 years ago, we almost, in some ways, from an employee perspective inside NTT, were able to get to know our employees better because we were on maybe a Teams call or whatever it was. Family members were in the background, joined the calls. We had things around family as part of the team or as the dog or whatever it was. And you suddenly got to know the person in a broader way. So I think digital doesn't have to be remote and disconnected. Digital is connected, and it's connecting these different ways we work and connecting with our colleagues, and that I think brings the human-centered approach back into the organization that's so important. But it's that partnership, Kevin, between CIO and CHRO that will be the magic, I think, if companies want to get this right.
And I think you've brought up that idea, that very fundamental idea of human connection, which is very important in these strategies. And I know in the research report, they talked about how 72% of CEOs had set strategies to modernize and digitally optimize the future workplace were defined and agreed But when others were asked, the operational staff was asked, only less than 50% of them had agreed that that was the case. So what do you think makes the difference in between a strategy to digitally connect employees and the actual practice of really connecting, the humanity of connecting employees? Do you have a practice that you are pursuing personally or advocating across the organization to make that digital connection matter?
And Kevin, I think that's one thing that came out of the report, and we see it often in the companies I also work with, is that it's one thing to define the strategy and even define the philosophy, but implementing it is a different story. And I think I'd come at that from two angles. One is there's definitely investment to be made from a technology perspective. And I think a lot of the report speaks to that, investing in the digital capability, enabling your hybrid workplace, ensuring your employees feel safe, that their data is safe, investing in the digital tools, things like that is absolutely critical. I think getting the digital investment right. So that, as I say, that earlier point around employees feeling empowered and having the right tools.
Yeah.
Aspect, Kevin, is realizing that when you try and implement this, especially on a global scale like NTT Ltd, there are different aspects to take into account from a human point of view. Cultures differ very, very much. Maybe in certain parts of the world, people want to come back into the workplace because it's more accepted within the culture. In other parts of the world, they may not have access to the bandwidth and the technology, which makes it difficult to work more hybridly. So there's very many different cultural, different aspects that you have to take into account. I think the other thing is that we need to all realize is, in my mind, this is it's a bit of a giant experiment, isn't it? We got everybody home safely, touch wood.
Yes.
Now we're coming back, yes, at different timelines into the workplace, but it isn't just a case of now we're coming back. What does hybrid actually mean, and how does an individual employee interpret that versus an employer, and getting that balance right I talked about earlier? And I think thinking about it as an experiment has helped me anyway personally, and that if we have technology to enable it, the digital transformation enables data as well. So now suddenly, and this is my key taking away, Kevin, is almost having an employee listening strategy. So I'm trying to be human-centered. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of these employees that are all over the world in different places. But if I can use the data insights, if I can employ listening strategies that are real-time, that also speak to personal preference, and use that then to inform the decisions that I make, maybe differently in different parts of the world, but also try and maintain my overall employer brand guided by those principles. Now that's challenging, Kevin. I mean, that isn't just go there, go there. But you need the data, insights, and then you need to be agile, Kevin, because you've got to course correct to be able to say, well, we tried that and it didn't work so effectively. So what happened to productivity? What happened to employee engagement? And can you get that data real time? Is the magic, I think, to making the digital experience optimum, but being agile enough to course correct and being humble enough to say, we tried it and it didn't work, so let's try something else. But you need the fundamental technology to do it. You need the data, and then you need the CHRO with the employee listening strategy, all three. And then, of course, the clients. Because, in our business anyway, a lot of our employees are on client sites, and this is all about being able to still service the client. So what are our clients also telling us, and bringing in the client data to the magic of that? And then I have to say, in addition, Kevin, we're going to invest a lot in enabling our managers, because I think, as I said, you can send the top-down messaging of how this will be implemented to your question, but a lot of this has got to be decided at the local level within those guidelines. So are managers empowered, and do they know how to manage hybrid teams that can therefore be effective and productive? And I think that's where companies, I think, will start to invest increasingly amounts of money, is in empowering their managers to lead and engage their employees.
And to do so remotely as well as in person.
Exactly. That hybrid manager.
That's the extra stretch. You have to be a remote manager. Yeah. I'm just curious, what do you believe makes for a good characteristic of a remote manager? How do we recognize that?
I think it's a good question, but I think the first thing I would say, Kevin, right off the blocks is with some level of empathy, first of all. We need to understand that conditions are different for our different employees. So understanding. I always say, put yourself in your shoes of the different employees you manage. So a level of deepening empathy, I think a definite clarity as a manager as well, and being clear to your teams the kind of things and activities that you do believe are better done in the physical workplace. And then being consistent and fair and making sure that we do that fairly across the organization. So if, for example, we say, your performance review or your one-to-one once a week or once a month is better done face-to-face, then be consistent so kind of defining that and creating that clarity up front. I think coaching and still connecting employees with each other and giving, the time for those team events. I mean, we're looking at things like sort of a fun workday kind of concept as well, and getting managers to realize, if you're coming into the office, let's collaborate. Don't come into the office and then behave as if you're on a team meeting all day, behind your closed doors. People won't come back in again. So it's sort of behaving in a way that is collaborative when you're in the workplace is very important, I think, to encourage people to come back in. And I think managers also need to be doing their own listening. Is it working? Is it not working? And be mindful when you're running teams that are a mixture of on-prem, as we would call it, and hybrid remote. And I've seen examples of digital learning vis-a-vis, in-course learning, where managers have set up, the training hours 12 till 2, but that's 4 a.m. in the West Coast of the Americas. But because it's suddenly digital learning, get up at 4 a.m. in the morning doesn't always work. So it's back into that empathy, listening, coaching, back connecting, that I think is all factors we are building into building capable managers within NTT.
Yeah, and I think that sentiment of fairness does not now mean treating everybody equally, but it means, as you said, if you lead with empathy, it's treating everybody fairly and meeting them where they are and what do they need. And employees are coming from very different COVID experiences. And we can move now to talk about employee safety. But what the survey indicated was that when safe, and that was the caveat, 80% of employees actually do prefer to come into the office. And 60% of them, though, however, prefer the option to work from home. Do you have any guiding philosophies on how do we set some fair guidance to managers in guiding them in how and when to decide when to let employees work from home and when not?
Yeah, I think Kevin, again, I'm cautious of this very top-down, you will spend 3 days in the office or whatever. Having said that, at NTT, we do have a guideline of around 50% of the time, because we do think, but we've been careful to say it's a philosophy. And obviously the nature of your work, the role you're in, your client you're servicing will influence all of that. But what we're not saying is you have to come in 3-4 days a week or things like that. We're saying about 50% of your time is what we think feels about right from the listening we've done to our employees. And we're also saying that perhaps sometime during the year, you can work from anywhere for up to about 4 weeks. So again, trying to differentiate our approach to the future way of working as an ability to attract talent. So I think that's important. It was one of my first comments. It's a real fight out there at the moment to hire, attract, and retain your talent because it's so competitive at the moment. So thinking about the future way of work and remote work to access skills. I've seen certain companies saying, well, we'll hire anywhere now, to get access to that skill. We don't mind. They don't even need to be near a satellite office. I think you need to think about the criticality of skills, the shortage of skills, not just the role, when you are deciding on how you approach your guidance that you give. But I do think, when we say employees want to, come into the office, but they want the flexibility, those are true, but it definitely comes down more to the geographic and the nature of the work and things like that. I would also say, Kevin, what we've picked up, and I know we haven't spoken about diversity and things like that, but again, when there's a shortage of talent and things like that, attracting women, retaining our critical female skills in the organization, this approach to the future way of work and what digital enables is very important. And looking at how flexibility addresses that ability to have a more balanced life as you raise children and things like that. And I think and you return to the workplace. I think it's a big thing employers are not looking sufficiently at.
there is a discussion about the difference between disruption and transformation. And the distinction I bring up is a disruption is when you've been disturbed and you're trying to get back to the way things were after the disturbance. And a transformation is really a fundamental, deep-seated change akin to moving from caterpillar to butterfly. It's irreversible. Have there been any elements at NTT that you have transformed or you feel will transform as we exit COVID or we move into a post-COVID environment that transforms some of the HR practices?
I'm going to be controversial, Kevin. I think it's all transformed. I don't think we're going back. And COVID, for all its terrible things, has been an accelerator of the digital future, the connected future. And I think accelerated, a much better way we can work going forward. And we spend so much time of our lives at work. We have a real opportunity here to enhance the way we work and live, and sort of working in the flow of life is the way I would put it, Kevin. And how do we as employers, whether we are in public sector, private sector, and I know it's different if you're in a hospital or different aspects of banking, etc. But how do we all, as employers, think about enhancing the work experience, the flexibility, the wellness of our employees? And I'm not just talking physical wellness, the mental wellness, the financial wellness. How do we take that to our hearts as employers and say, let's take these things into consideration, using technology to enable a better way of working for our clients and for our employees? And I think there's a real opportunity, and that's transformation. That's not going back to the way we were. And I think it's exciting what lies ahead of us. I don't think it's easy to implement. And I think the only other thing I haven't mentioned, Kevin, is I do think it's a way to also achieve a more sustainable future, whether it be from the diversity lens I talked about and being able to address that. I think it's, we'll need less office footprints, less electricity consumption, less commuting perhaps into the offices. I think there's a real sustainability or impact here that we can have, and not only, with employees, but within the communities within which we operate as we go forward.
Yeah, and I think the research report on the topic of sustainability, 95% of people agreed that having that sustainability helps attract and retain talent. Mm-hmm. So how do you engage employees in conversations about the company's role in smart sustainability? Okay. And what role does it have on attracting or retaining talent?
It's huge. It's huge. So when we listen, being part of a purpose-led organization and being able to articulate, in the case of NTT, how technology will enable a more sustainable, connected future is one of the primary reasons why our employees will join NTT and stay, because they will be part of a large global company that can use technology to fundamentally help our clients achieve more sustainable outcomes, be it in healthcare, education, cities, etc. So there's a huge connection between purpose and impact and employee experience, employee value proposition. But what you got to be able to do, Kevin, is to be very credible in that. I think mistake companies make is to sort of say it. What we will actually do is to measure that and demonstrate that. And I think that's what employees want to see. And they want to see that the work that they're doing every day, from wherever they're doing it, is part of the organization's impact ambition. So it's linking purpose and meaning of work, not just I'm contributing to the sustainable future of my own company in terms of its profitability or whatever, but I'm also at the same time enabling a societal impact. And if you can engage your employees around that and you can show them the link between the work they're doing and the fact that they're trusted to do it from anywhere, but in a collaborative way with their colleagues and their communities, and then try and measure the impact. I do think it's not easy, but it's easier in technology. I used education as one of my earlier ones. How do we use digital technology to enable a broader reach and address the inequalities in education and so uplift societies? That's the kind of work that our employees want to be involved in and are excited about and inspired about to do.
Thank you for listening to the NTT Health and Wellbeing Podcast. For additional resources and to continue this conversation, please visit www.global.ntt/health and well-being.